My name is Joni Albrecht, and I'm the director of the John Marshall Center here at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. And I'm delighted to welcome you to today's VMHC Scholar Series. We wish to acknowledge the generous support of Conrad Mercer Hall, who has endowed the VMHC Scholar Series. Conrad serves as honorary vice chair of the Board of Trustees of this institution and has been a champion of our work for decades. We also wish to acknowledge former VMHC President and CEO, Dr. Charles F. Bryan, whom this series also honors. Before I highlight some upcoming opportunities and events, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. First, did you know that you can now tour VMHC's rare book room and vault? A new series offered by our wonderful library staff on Saturday afternoons gives special access to an area of the museum that is off limits to daily admission and library visitors. Come see some of the rarest documents, books, and artifacts that are from across 5 centuries of Virginia history. You can check out our events calendar for the next vault tour. It's coming soon. Don't miss that. And then on Thursday, June 12th at noon, we will welcome historian Greg Kimball, who will discuss his new book, Searching for Jimmy Strother, A Tale of Music, Murder, and Memory. James Lee Strother, Jimmy, recorded 13 songs at the Virginia State Prison Farm in 1936. He was serving time there for murder. The songs provide a unique window into the folk tradition and anchor Strother as a unique figure in blues history. Kimball will discuss the social meaning of Strother's songs, which speak of labor exploitation, sundown towns, and the dangers of the world. Strother's personal experiences as an industrial laborer in a steel mill where he was blinded at a young age in an explosion, migrant to the city, and street performer reflect these larger social forces that shaped Black life in America. Kimball and fellow musicians Cheryl Warner and Rick Manson will also perform selections of Strother's songs. And now for today's program, always order the pie, and sometimes you should order it first. We're delighted that you've come with us today with columnist and author Bill Lohmann as he leads us down the roads less taken in search of interesting places, people, and pie across Virginia. We hope you leave today's talk with an idea for your next day trip or weekend getaway, all wonderfully documented in a way that only Bill can in his newly released 3rd edition of Backroads and Byways of Virginia, Drives, Day Trips, and Weekend Excursions, which he'll be signing after today's program. Bill is an award-winning columnist and a Richmond native. He wrote for the Richmond Times-Dispatch and previously the Richmond News Leader. He also reported for the United Press International in Richmond, Orlando, and Atlanta, and began his career as a sportswriter for the Charlottesville Daily Progress. I miss Bill's column and its warming effect. I know many of you do too, most of you do. I'm thrilled that he is with us today. Please join me in welcoming Bill Lohmann.
Thank you, Joni. I was just telling her I wasn't nervous about this till I saw all these people. Anyway, thank you for having me. Let's get my stuff set up here. There we go. Before I retired from the Richmond Times-Dispatch in 2023, after 44 years in the news business, I had logged a lot of miles pursuing stories around the Commonwealth of Virginia, and many places even more far-flung. I'm thinking, in this case in particular, of that time in 1984 when I travel to Cuba with no passport or visa to cover a news event. I remain grateful the Cuban government let me in, and perhaps even more so that they let me out. By the way, I'm the one with the earpiece listening to a translation at a news conference. In addition to the rest of my unpreparedness for visiting Cuba, I also spoke no Spanish, and I wore a long-sleeve shirt in Havana in June. But I was only there for 12 hours, so it didn't really matter. Most of my travels for stories have been far less sketchy. Many were made with my good friend Bob Brown, who's here. He, of course, is the legendary photographer for the Times-Dispatch. We learned early on in my first years at the Times-Dispatch that we shared the same ambition, which was to stay out of the office as much as possible. And so we did. We also shared an affection for pie. And we did a lot of crazy things while we were pursuing stories. The first major project we worked on was a series more than 20 years ago about the longest road in Virginia, Route 58, a stretch of road 500 miles in length that runs from the beachfront at Virginia Beach to the mountains of Cumberland Gap, the farthest westward point in the state where Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee come together. For 6 months, we traveled 58, putting together stories every week about the people and places along the way. And when we reached Cumberland Gap, the people out there told us that we had started at the wrong end. And here's some of that pie. I will say this one's next. So this is Cumberland Gap. This was, Bob and I finally got there, and you can stand in Kentucky and Virginia walking up to the pinnacle, which I'm easily amused. So I always think that's a cool thing to be able to do. But back to this pie thing. This is not on 58, but this illustrates how much Bob and I like pie. This was in Louisa County at a little place called Floozy's Pie Shop. And we went in there, and Bob is a lot more forward than I am. And he walked up to the counter and said to this woman, "Which one of y'all is Floozy?" And she said, "Honey, we're all Floozies." And I think we ate the rest of that sour cherry pie. It was very good. But even before my newspaper assignments with Bob, I'd done some extensive travel writing, none more extensive or exhausting than the 7-week family vacation we took 25 years ago in the summer of 2000. We called the series, "Are We There Yet?" I filed stories and photos several times a week for the paper at a time before technology made it quite so easy to do all of that, chronicling our adventures and misadventures and what it was like to picnic on peanut butter and jelly sandwiches pretty much every day for almost 2 months. That cross-country trip taught me some very important lessons about travel. Primarily that travel is far more than simply getting from point A to point B. You know, this might seem like a pretty basic concept, but you cannot truly understand it until you're out there. Being away from home and your day-to-day comfort zone broadens your perspective, puts you in contact with people who live very different lives, shows us that there's a whole big world out there beyond our little bubble. Now, of course, I feel like I'm channeling my inner Rick Steves here, but it really is true. You get out there and you meet people and you see things and you leave yourself open to possibilities. I've learned over the years too that a trip of enlightenment can involve simply going around the corner, or heading across the state, or traveling halfway around the world, as my wife and I did a couple of years ago when we went to visit our son in Mongolia. Mongolia. It wasn't on my bingo card for going to Mongolia, but our son was a Fulbright scholar and spent a couple of years over there. So we went to see him. Otherwise, we never go to Mongolia. So for 3 weeks, we rambled deep into the countryside on unpaved routes. We marveled at herds of goats and sheep and camels, wonderful rainbows. We hung out with hospitable Mongolians, and let me tell you, they are very hospitable. They're some of the most welcoming people I've ever been around. We would be walking. This one day, we were up in the mountains. We were the three of us, my wife and son. We were just taking a little hike, and this family just starts waving at us, waving us over. They were having a picnic, and so they invited us to join their picnic. We had no language in common, although Jack spoke enough Mongolian that by that point that the Mongolians were humored by his attempts, and so they were very kind about it, and because he was trying, they worked with him, and so we ate their food. They eat a lot of mutton because they have a lot of sheep. They eat a lot of mutton, and so we ate mutton. We drank fermented horse milk and homemade vodka. This is what happens after a little homemade vodka. We were invited by friendly nomadic herders into their movable homes because still, I don't remember the number, a third of Mongolians. It's a herding culture. They herd their goats, sheep, horses, and they move and they live in what we call yurts. They call gers, but they are these movable structures that, depending on the weather and the needs of their herds, they can pick up and move several times a year. So they invited us into their gers and gave us the aforementioned fermented horse milk, a lot of yogurt. They eat a lot of yogurt. They have big tubs of yogurt in the corners of their gers that they share with visitors. But they give you whatever they've got. They're just the nicest folks, and very curious about Americans. They're just really great people, and we'd have gotten none of that if we hadn't gone there. So that just shows you getting out and trying things like that. But another truth about traveling is that all the planning in the world, sometimes things work out just as you envision, and sometimes they don't. But I've also discovered that they often make for good stories either way. Like the time on our family cross-country trip when we were minding our own business, eating the aforementioned peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in a pretty park in Spokane, Washington. We were packing up to leave, and we noticed a man coming into the park carrying a couple of backpacks. He set the backpacks on the ground, and out hopped 2 little kangaroos. I thought we were in Washington, not Australia, but it turned out, we went to talk to them. It turned out they were wallaroos. And this man couldn't have been nicer. We got to talking. We told him we were headed to the Pacific coast, and he invited us to stop by his family's exotic animal ranch. What are the odds you meet some stranger and his family has an exotic animal ranch along the Columbia River? And it happens to be right across. We were going to the Dalles to stay the night, right across the river from the Dalles. And so, being a little suspicious, we thought the guy was pulling our leg. He said, "I will call my foreman and tell him you're coming." And we said, "Sure you will." This story's too good to be true. So, oh yeah, there he is with the wallaroos. So great. So we wake up the next morning. We stayed at a motel in the Dalles, and I looked at Robin, my wife, and I said, "Do you want to go over and see if this ranch actually exists?" And she said, "I guess." So we find a bridge and go across the bridge and find there's a sign for this ranch, the name he gave us. So far, so good. We drive down this long road and we're thinking, they're going to kill us, aren't they? Never heard from again. So we get there, we open the car door, the van door, and this fella comes out and says, "My name is Carlo. I've been expecting you." And so then we spend the whole morning. He has zebras. He had elks. I mean, he gave us this great tour, all with this amazing view of the Columbia River in the distance. And you can't see it because of the lighting here, but you can see Mount Hood way, way in the distance. It's incredible. So there was something. And we got all this, all because we stopped to eat a sandwich in a park and had enough curiosity to pay attention to a guy with a couple of backpacks. On the other hand, travel is not all fun and wallaroos. Like last Friday night, when my wife and I spent the night on the floor at JFK Airport. After our flight to Richmond was canceled following our 3-week trip to Paris. One night you're strolling along the Champs-Élysées, and the next, well, this. We slept surprisingly well on the floor, but not a long time, but well. But we were treated to a nice airport sunrise the next morning. And a very compassionate Delta agent found us a couple of seats on a Saturday morning flight. Bless her heart. I think she felt sorry for me when I showed up at her desk that morning. I was groggy and bedraggled and unable to answer promptly when she asked me my name. She laughed a very empathetic laugh and said she was going to make my day. And she did. Travel is like anything else. You take the good with the bad. You just have to be open-minded and a little flexible. And that's where the title of this program comes in. When Bob and I were traveling, we had a favorite little restaurant in Fancy Gap, just off the Blue Ridge Parkway down to Southwest Virginia, not far from the North Carolina line. It was called the Lakeview Restaurant, although I'm not sure there's actually a lake. Anyway, they have excellent fried chicken and terrific coconut cream pie. And on one road trip when Bob was by himself, he stopped by for the chicken, and he saw this piece of coconut cream pie in the pie case, and he had that in mind for dessert. He polished off his dinner, thinking about that piece of pie the whole time. And when the waitress asked if he liked dessert, he asked for that piece of coconut cream pie. And her reply, "I'm sorry, we sold the last piece just a few minutes ago." The next time we visited that restaurant, we ordered the pie first. Which brings me to my most recent project, the 3rd edition of Backroads and Byways of Virginia. This was a book, and Bob and I did a couple of books for the Times-Dispatch, big coffee table books. But this was a separate thing. This was a solo project that a publisher in New York hired me to do 15 years ago. And I did one edition, then they came back and in 2016 or something, asked for a second edition. And then I've done this new edition. So I guess when I'm like 90, I'll be doing the 5th edition or something. I don't know. But I'll probably take it. But it's a book that has, they have other books for other states. And the format is that you do, each chapter is a different drive, that the author comes up with different suggested itineraries. And so I just picked 19 different drives around Virginia. I tried to spread them out, from the Eastern Shore all the way to Cumberland Gap, and just did some things that interested me, things that I was aware of from my earlier stories, things that I'd learned about doing this project. And so I just did lots of different things. I mean, and so, on a trip, when you go traveling, there are lots of destinations to visit, parks and places and things like that. But even just driving across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel is an event that some people won't do. but you take that to the Eastern Shore, and you got beaches over there. And so I have a chapter on the Eastern Shore. and I have a chapter on Tangier Island, which, because I like Tangier Island, I've written about it for 25 years or more. And I had to check with my editors to make sure it was okay, because you can't actually drive to Tangier Island. The book is focused on driving tours, but they said, sure, you can. I talked them into it. So Tangier, if you've been to Tangier, you know what I'm saying. If you don't, it's this curious little island. It's not a lot of solid ground on Tangier, as you can see. It's 3 separate little ridges, they call them, where the houses are clustered. The rest of it is very marshy, and it's losing ground every year. Scientists figure that it may be uninhabitable within 50 years because for 3 reasons: rising seawaters, erosion, and the land is actually sinking anyway. So that's not a good trio for people who live there. The population of Tangier used to be about 1,200 people back in the maybe 30s or 40s. Now it's about 400 and dropping. There's not a lot of jobs to do on Tangier. And so it's sort of this vanishing place. And if you ever thought about going there, now would be a pretty good time to get there. The easiest way to get there is by ferry out of Reedville. There are also ferries that run out of Crisfield, Maryland, and out of Anancock on the Eastern Shore. But the ferries don't run in the wintertime, so you have to plot your trip then. Of course, if you know somebody with a private helicopter, like I did, I wrote about the doctor who served Tangier Island for a number of years, and so he had a helicopter. So when I went to do that story, I got this picture. But Tangier, very interesting place. One of the little islands where people used to live 100 years ago is gone. There's no houses on there anymore. On Upwards, they called it. It's kind of behind where the picture is. So it really is going away. And if there's a lot to recommend to seeing this different place that people have a bit of a dialect. Get some pretty good crab cakes over there. It's just interesting to see people live in a place like this. Because I've done a lot of stories, I've been there at different times of the year. And one time I was there at Christmas time doing some interviews for the book about the doctor I wrote. And it was so different. Of course, there's no tourists in December there. It was me and the residents. But to go there, and it actually snowed the night I was there. So I'm walking through this quiet snow, and it was fabulous. I'm not saying I want to live there, but it was a very interesting place. Clear across the state is possibly my favorite part of Virginia, which is Grayson Highlands State Park, kind of between Galax and Abington. It's a beautiful park. They have a herd of wild ponies. They have unbelievable scenery. It's just a beautiful place. We've been going there for 25 years, up there almost every summer and camp and do a lot of hiking. And you can hike to Mount Rogers is in the national forest, the national recreation area right next to Grayson Highlands. And Mount Rogers is the tallest peak in Virginia, 5,700 feet, with absolutely no view. It's a tree-covered mountain. Lots of views going up, but when you get to the top of Virginia, you can't see anything. But except there's a USGS medallion telling you that you made it to that rock. Also out in that area, you kind of continue on Route 58 and you get to Damascus, a nice little town that really got hammered by the storms last fall and flooded very badly. So they're trying to make a comeback. But Damascus is, I think they call themselves Trail Town USA or something, because they have the Appalachian Trail comes through there. The Virginia Creeper Trail comes through there, the bicycle trail. It's just, it's a nice little town to stay or visit or stop and get a bite to eat. Another place I've come to like that's sort of out of the way in Southwest Virginia that I devoted a chapter to is Burke's Garden, which is in Tazewell County. It's, I think it's the state's highest valley is how they categorize it. I think it's 3,000 feet elevation, so it's very high. It's ringed by mountains. It looks like a thumbprint if you see an aerial view, like just a divot in the earth. It's a beautiful place. The Appalachian Trail runs on one ridge on the east side. There's only one little road coming in from the town of Tazewell. So you got to want to go there. And there's not much there once you get there except beautiful scenery. You can stay in some Airbnbs. They have a couple of stores you can buy provisions at. It's just a very pretty, quiet place, and you can't beat the scenery. There's some farming there. I think only about 200 people live there full time, and maybe 400 in the summertime when people have summer homes there. One interesting thing about Burke's Garden is that the Amish have set up a foothold there. They have a nice size Amish community, and so they have their horse and buggies that they get around the valley in. And of the 200 people who live there full time, I think maybe just less than half, maybe a third to a half, are Amish. The Amish tried to settle there 30 or 40 years ago, and a couple families started, but they never could. Not enough land was available for them to buy to build their community. And so they like to live in communities of at least some number of families. And so those people went ahead and left and went away. But probably about 15 years ago, a couple of families moved in, and it's gradually built up from there. And I was talking to one of the guys, David, he and his wife were the first Amish couple to move there. And he's a partner in a beef cattle operation, and his wife runs one of the great little stores there. And of course, they're of the order that they're off the electrical grid. They don't have electricity, but they use solar power. They don't have phones in their homes, but they have phones out by the road that they can use because they don't like phones to disrupt family life. So they avail themselves of some modern conveniences, but not all. But I was saying, well, would you like Burke's Garden to ever be completely Amish? And he said, oh, no. He said, we have 18 families now, and that's a really great number. He said, because everything we do they come together and decide everything they do. He said, you get more people than that, you can't decide anything. And he said, besides, we need the English for transportation, for jobs, for things like that. He says, we like there to be more English than us because he didn't say symbiotic, but that's really what it is. They sort of work together, and so they like that. So I thought that was an interesting comment. I thought maybe they wanted to have their own commune there, and he said, oh, no, not at all. We can't agree on anything. Just down the road from Burke's Garden is one of Bob and I's favorite restaurants. It's right on 460. It's called Cuz's Uptown Barbecue. And there's not a lot of barbecue on the menu anymore, but it's such a great story. It's in this old barn. The first time we went to this place, we were told to go there to eat, and we missed it because it's in this old barn that you don't think it's anything there. It's an old dairy barn that was on the family farm of the founder, Mike Thompson. He and his wife, Yvonne, started this place in the 70s. And now it's this iconic restaurant just outside of Tazewell. It's in Pounding Mill is the little community, or Pounding Thrill, as Mike called it. But it's great food, nice people, great scenery. They got a couple of cabins up on the hillside that we stay in when we can. I was just there last summer, and Mike died a few years ago, but Yvonne has kept the place going. They survived a couple of fires over the decades, and then she kept it going after Mike died. And Yvonne's story is amazing to me. I mean, she's lived it, so it's not so amazing to her, I guess. But Yvonne grew up in Hong Kong in a high-rise. She came to the United States as a college student and lived with an uncle in St. Louis who ran a Chinese restaurant. And but she wanted to be a journalist because she saw how hard the restaurant business was. So she graduated from the University of Missouri journalism school, and she had 2 job offers coming out in the late 70s. One was a weekly paper in Kentucky, and one was the paper down the road from Tazewell, Richlands, the Richlands paper. She took the Richlands job, and then she got set up on a blind date with Mike Thompson, and then they got married, and they opened this restaurant, and she thought she was coming here to cover city council meetings, and and then she's been running a restaurant for 40 some years. So great. skipping back across the state to a place. This was a new chapter I wrote for this book, the Dismal Swamp, which is not your typical tourist stop, I think, but it's an interesting place. And Bob and I wrote about this some years ago on the 58 series. I'd never been to the swamp, but we went and wrote about it, and it was fascinating. You know, when in the 1700s, George Washington and other people tried to drain the swamp, they thought they could develop some great land there, so they dug these ditches that still exist, the Washington Ditch, and they thought if they drained it, it would be wonderful land for development. And it turned out they really couldn't do that, but it did end up loggers logged the swamp, so it was commercially productive, and people did end up living in the swamp. A lot of enslaved people, indigenous people lived there all through the years. And there's just a great history that a lot of people don't know. But we went, my wife and I, she went with me on this to the Dismal Swamp. And you'll notice that we went in December. So there's not a lot of wildlife crawling around at that time. It's also a little bit hot and humid in the summer, but you can go anytime you want. But it's got this beautiful lake, Lake Drummond right in the middle there. And it's a really interesting place. And I remember when Bob and I went, we were talking to the park ranger, and they got these logging roads, and those are the roads you can drive through or hike through. And he said, yeah, we get some people coming here. He goes, the problem is you really need to stick to the roads and the trails, because you get 50 yards off the roads, everything looks the same. He says, occasionally we have people who go off the roads and they get lost and it gets dark and they spend a night or two in the swamp. He said, they all find religion. So we went, so we made a point of going when the sun was high and getting out when we still had daylight. Okay, now the good part. Okay. So there's so many, the pie thing became kind of a shtick with me and Bob, but we really do like pie. And they always seems to have good stories. Here's the woman from Floozy's again. That was such a great, very, very good pie there. And then maybe our favorite pie place is Woodruff's store out in near Lynchburg. We found this place a long time ago. We found it because Southern Living had mentioned them and said it maybe had the best apple pie they'd ever had or something. And so we were sold. So we went there, and the thing was the pie was really good, but the people were just sensational. And the story there was a family that lived in the Woodruffs, lived in this store and ran a general store back in the 50s and 60s. And they lived upstairs. And their mom, Fannie Mae Woodruff, she was the mom. She ran the store. She pumped the gas. Her husband had a job in town. And so they moved eventually, and the store stayed vacant for a lot of years. And then their youngest daughter came back in the 90s, I think, and decided she wanted to come back to the store and open a little cafe. And so she opened a little cafe, and it was kind of hard going. And one time somebody, but she, they made sandwiches and she made some pies that people seemed to like. And she said one time some car ran into their sign, so they had to get a new sign made. So she had the sign maker, after it said Woodruff Store Cafe, she had the sign maker add "and pie shop." And boy, did that worked. And so we wrote about them a couple of times, and other papers have written about them. And Al Roker showed up from the Today Show. They're famous. The Wall Street Journal wrote about them. And the mom was so great. She was like the ambassador. She would sit at the back table and just entertain all the people who came in to eat. And she lived to 104, and she died, I think, in 2021. But she was hilarious. And now Angie, her daughter, still carries on, and she runs the place. And but they're just, I can't tell you how nice they are. It's just, you just like to go back there because they're such kind people. Another pie place we liked is the Red Truck Bakery up in Warrenton. And I'd never heard of Red Truck Bakery, but Bob and I were going up. How's my time? Oh, we're good. Bob and I were going up to do a story on Robert Duvall, who lives in Fauquier County. And so I was doing some research on Duvall and trying to read some things on what he did in the community or something. And a couple of times I saw a mention in stories about him that mentioned the Red Truck Bakery. He apparently likes the Red Truck Bakery. So we stopped there on the way to his house. And we went in and had breakfast or something. Then we asked the people there, said, Robert Duvall comes in? Oh, yeah, he comes here a lot. What kind of pie does he like? And they said, he likes the apple. He and his wife like the apple pie. I said, we'll take one of them. So we bought a apple pie that in today's money would be like about $100 or something. I don't know. But we bought this big apple pie for him. And when we went to his house, we thought there'd be like a bunch of publicists sitting around, controlling everything. We got there was nobody there. His wife answered the door. And she said, Bobby's upstairs. He'll be down in a minute. And we said, here's some pie. So we gave them pie and had this great interview with Duvall's. It was so pie opens all kinds of doors, And the publicist had said we could have 15 minutes with him, but the publicist wasn't there. So we had 2.5 hours with him. Another place that I've been to is not too far from there. It's called Mom's Apple Pie. It's in Leesburg. And they have 2 or 3 shops around Northern Virginia. It's in I think it's an old filling station, this tiny little building. But I went there, I'd heard about it, so I went there to see what was going on. They had good pie. And I talked to, and they're legendary up in that part of the state. And so the day I was there, the son, Tyson's store, and I got to talking to him and telling him what I was doing. And he said, yeah, his parents were running a farm, but it was kind of touch and go financially. And then they started selling, food and pies on the side of the road or whatever. And they were very popular. So they opened this store and took off. He said the secret is, though, that most of the recipes they used were his dad's recipes. But Dad's apple pie didn't have the same ring as Mom's apple pie. So, his mom cooked too, but they said the recipes really were his dad's. But anyway, so they're going great. You can't always live on pie, so sometimes you need barbecue. And I like this place in Gordonsville called the Barbecue Exchange in Gordonsville. Stop there a lot. Really good place. You're going to get whiplash on this show. So now in Chincoteague on the Eastern Shore, the book is organized a lot better than the pictures are. Misty of Chincoteague. You come on in, on the northern neck, you got Westmoreland State Park. I did a chapter on, I really am jumping around here. I did a chapter on the former plantations along Route 5. And I'd written about them before, but this time I had a little bit different angle because some of the plantations in the last decade or so have really made a concerted effort to tell a more complete story of the history of their places that includes what the enslaved people did, what the indigenous people did before they got there. And it's as the folks who own Westover, the family that owns Westover, they're really into telling a fuller, more realistic story of what these places were about and the history of them. The problem is, one, they're a family. They're not a big institution that has deep pockets to do all kinds of research. The other thing, there's not a lot to research because there's not a lot of records for a lot of the things involving the enslaved people who lived and worked at these places. So they have to get what they can where they can, including inviting state archaeologists in to dig on their property and see what they can find about the people who lived there, so many centuries ago. And so I was very, very fascinated by that and what they're doing in some of those places along the plantations. A place that's mentioned in one of the chapters, and I've forgotten which chapter now, because Colonial Beach, which I had never really been to, but it's this old tiny resort town right on the Potomac there across from Maryland. That's kind of trying to make a comeback. And they have places to stay and eat and all that kind of thing. It's kind of an interesting little place. Kind of barren. I was unfortunately there when the weather wasn't good, but it looks better when it's crowded, I think. But But Colonial Beach, elsewhere on the northern neck, Reedville. The Reedville Fishermen's Museum is an interesting place to visit. And if you go to Tangier, you catch the ferry, you come back in the afternoon, stop at the Reedville Fishermen's Museum. A little farther out into the state, Farmville, the High Bridge Trail State Park, which is a cool place. It's an old rail line out there that they've repurposed as a recreational trail. I think it's 30 some miles now, and you can access it a number of places, but Farmville is one of the places. And you can ride across the High Bridge, it's almost a half a mile long and about 160 feet high, I think. And you want to pedal fast so you don't look down. But it's a very cool thing. And also in Farmville is the Moton Museum, which is the old schoolhouse. It was a black schoolhouse, and in 1951, I think, the students walked out because of terrible conditions, and it was, in some ways, it was sort of the beginning of the civil rights movement in Virginia. These students, Barbara Johns led the walkout, and now the place is a museum, and their walkout in their suit about poor conditions and poor supplies and things like that became part of the Brown versus Board of Education case. Anyway, it's now the schoolhouse is now a museum, and really good. It's free. The schoolhouse, the museum partners with Longwood University, so but it's really worth a stop to get a history that, I mean, when I was growing up, I didn't really get this kind of history too much. So it's very interesting. Continuing on southwest, the Blue Ridge Parkway. Mabry Mill, right near Meadows of Dan, is a picturesque spot that everybody stops to shoot pictures. And Meadows of Dan is an interesting little community where you can go to the poor farmers market and load up on supplies and pumpkins at the right time of year. Farther up the parkway is the town of Floyd, which is one of the really, really intriguing towns in Virginia. And the Floyd Country Store seems to be sort of the heart of that town. They have live music on a couple of nights a week, and it really has the feel of an old-time country store. Just down from Floyd, right off the parkway again, is there's a few wineries, including Chateau Morissette. And if you do any traveling around Virginia, in the last 30 or 40 years, wineries are gone crazy across the state. I did a whole chapter on this little stretch of road in Nelson County, where there's all kinds of wineries and breweries and distilleries and cideries, like Bold Rock Cidery. I suggest a designated driver, but it's really a good road trip and a good place to stay, not just down from Wintergreen. This looks like bourbon. It's maple syrup, and this is a Bob picture. Good job, Bob. It was good. We did a story many years ago in Highland County about the Maple Festival that they have every March there. And so we went to some of the sugar camps there when the sap started running in February, early March. And we went to this one fella who did it the old-fashioned way with barrels and stirring and all this kind of stuff. And he pulled out some of this warm maple syrup and put it in a cup for us to sample. It was really good. Also in Highland County is just a beautiful county. You go out Broad Street 250 all the way right into Highland County. Up the mountain, you get a beautiful view of Monterey. Of Highland County. Then you come down and ride through Monterey, and West Virginia is about 6 miles on the other side of Monterey, I think. A recent development there is, excuse me, I need some Virginia artesian water. This is an old fire tower that I think was built in the 30s. And at some point they brought it down. They dismantled it, but a fella saved all the parts. And then a Richmond lawyer, Skip Jones, who had ties to Highland County, he bought the parts and paid the guy to reconstruct it on his property. and he lets people climb it if they want. He said it was such a part of his childhood that he didn't want to see it go away. And so it's just off the road, and I think it's 80 feet tall, and you get just an outstanding view of Monterey from up there. But highly recommend Highland County, and I lost my train of thought. Where the homestead is, right south of Highland County. Yes. Farther south in Galax, some cabins we stayed at when I did something on the New River Trail, which is a linear state park, a bicycle trail, again, an old railroad line that runs from Galax to Pulaski with a little spur off to Fries. That's if you ever go to Southwest Virginia and you go to a town spelled Fries, it's Fries. If you say fries, they give you bad directions. But I think the trail is 50 some miles, and we've ridden it a number of times over the years. But it's just it's a really nice way to get out and get some exercise, and beautiful scenery, a lot of trestles going over. It's similar, if you ever know about the Virginia Creeper Trail that I mentioned earlier around Abingdon and Damascus. The Creeper Trail, the upper part of that, I think is still kind of washed out from the storm last year. The lower part from Damascus to Abingdon was always fine. I don't think the New River Trail was affected by the storm. But you have the trestles you can go across, and they even have a tunnel you can pedal through. You have to always pedal to the light because you can't see very much when you're going through there. Big Stone Gap is a place I mentioned in the book, way out in Southwest. There's a great little park a walking trail all around the town, and they have these carvings in some of the trees that are kind of cool. Not too far from there is another state park. I love the state parks; it's really good. The Natural Tunnel State Park, of course, a huge tunnel, and freight trains still come through there regularly. And you can stand on the platform and wave to them as they go by. Natural Tunnel State Park also has, we stayed up there, and they have these old block houses from the frontier days where frontier families lived. If you go down 81 to Abingdon, Abingdon's a pretty little town, right across from the Barter Theater, and of course that's. A lot of you probably have been there, but that's a good destination. And then Bristol, and I'm going to wrap up with Bristol. Bristol's, Virginia and Tennessee on either side of State Street, and they have this Country Music Museum, History of Country Music Museum, right there in downtown. It's in this old car dealership. And years ago, when Bob and I were doing the 58 series, we went to the fledgling Country Music Museum, the birthplace of Country Music Museum, and it was in a shopping mall, in a little storefront in a shopping mall. And we were talking to the guy and talking about what the work they did and that, and we said, we'd love to do a story on someone who makes musical instruments in this part of the state, since that's such a big part of the history and culture down here. He goes, oh yeah, a lot of people do that. He goes, I got one guy who'd be great if he would talk to you. And we said, well, yeah, we'd love to talk to him. And so this is an example of if you leave yourself open to possibilities. So he said, I'll call him and ask him if he'll talk to you. I warn you, he's kind of cantankerous. I'll never forget, he used the word cantankerous, which you don't hear every day. We said, okay, we get along with everybody. We can do that. So he came back and he said, I talked to Jack. And he said he would talk to you. We said, that's great. We'll catch him next trip down here. And he said, no. He said, you come right now. So we said, okay. So sure, we'll go. We weren't doing anything that afternoon. Or not. We didn't want to tell our editors that. We didn't have anything planned that afternoon. We were just doing research. And so the guy led us out there. It's outside of Bristol, turned off on some squiggly road next to a creek, and the creek got wider and the road got narrower. And we finally got to Jack's house, and we knock on the door, remembering the part about the cantankerousness. And his wife answered the door, And she said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Jack's in the back playing. Come back here." So she took us into their bedroom where Jack was playing fiddle. And let's see, that's my foot right there. So I'm sitting on their bed. We're listening to Jack, and he didn't even look at us, much less speak to us. And I'm thinking, this man's cantankerous. He's going to attack us right here, you know. And he played, and he was playing music to a tape. So the tape stopped, and then he started talking to us, and it seemed like he got to liking us because he started telling all these stories and everything, having a good time. And he goes, "Let me show you something." So he takes us outside, and he had these big, different outbuildings, sheds and stuff. So he took us in. He also showed us all the violins he kept on a spare bed in the house that he had made. And so he takes us out. One shed was where he made his workshop. He had all the instruments and tools and everything, and the wood. And then he took us to another shed where they cured hams and had all these hams in the rafters. And then he took us to another shed where they had shelves and shelves. They had an enormous garden every year, shelves and shelves of these canned vegetables and fruit and big bottles of elderberry wine that they had made. And then he reaches up on the top shelf and he pulled down this jar of clear liquid. And he said, "My neighbor made this." And he said to cut it 4 times with spring water. "Here, try it." And so we tried it. And then he looked at us and said, "You boys got time for a biscuit?" And so Nanny goes in and starts making biscuits in the skillet on the stove. And we had biscuits. We had elderberry wine. We were there all afternoon. I mean, and a few years later, my son had started playing violin. And so I went up to see Jack, and my son, also named Jack, went with me. And so he and Jack Branch jammed in one of the back rooms. And we ended up purchasing one of Jack's fiddles for my Jack, who a couple years later played Jack Branch's fiddle on the stage at the Carpenter Theater with one of the Richmond Youth Symphony orchestras. Just all because we said, "Okay, we'll go see this old guy." 20 years earlier. Unbelievable. And that's mercifully the end for you. I think I left a few minutes for questions if anybody has any.
Bill, that was great. Thank you so much. I miss reading you, as everybody, I'm sure, in this room does. So here's my question. Barbecue, Virginia or North Carolina?
I like it all.
Bill, good afternoon. Wonderful talk. I just want to give a shout out to Woodruff's. My cousins supply the apples, the peaches, and the sweet potatoes for their pies. And I mean to tell you, folks, if you haven't been, it is a wonderful day trip. And they may even sing the gospel for you.
We have a video of that somewhere. They did that for us. Before you go, though, make sure they're open because they're only open like Wednesday through Saturday, I think.
A simple question. I really enjoyed your talk, of course. Do you have any trips planned?
I'm still getting over sleeping on the floor at JFK. I don't think so. We'll go somewhere in the fall, I think, but I don't know where yet.
this is not a question, but it is a story about a country store. And Alf Rupp was traveling through the countryside, and he needed some gas, so he went into the store and saw a ham. The story about Jackson the ham reminded me of this. And he said, you know, I'd like to have that ham, but I don't have enough cash for the gas and the ham. So he said, I want to get a check. So he went up to the old guy and he said, you take a check? And he said, yeah. So he started scrolling his name out and thinking about all the honors he had received. And he said, I wonder if this old guy knows me. So he turned the check around, said, do you know who that is? And the old guy says, I don't know, but I hope it's you.
Are you working on another book?
Not at the moment. I've done some freelance magazine pieces and that kind of thing, but I haven't. I need to come up with an idea first. Oh, and I should say, before you ask another question, I should say that my man Bob brought me a pie today.
Bill, I want to ask you about Natural Bridge of Virginia. My husband came out of Natural Bridge Station down in the valley, went to Natural Bridge High School, came to Richmond, to University of Richmond, met me in the Capitol Square. So my years are going back to Natural Bridge. I know you've been there. I know you've written. You have a book on anything on that? The Natural Bridge?
A natural bridge?
Yeah.
Just that it became a state park a few years ago.
There was a Natural Bridge station where the train came through and stopped at the station. Then you go on over to the hotel, the Bridge House, and Lexington, Virginia has a lot of history all around there.
Oh, yeah, that area is rich in things like that.
Get him and then I'll get you. Right after this one.
I want to know where you recommend good pie in Richmond.
Well, Bob swears by Williams Bakery, and that's good. Proper pie is very good. I've never had bad pie anywhere. Although there was one place we went. This is not to cast aspersions, but we went to a German restaurant outside of Stanton. Food was great, and the guy said, and we said we want to get some pie or something. He goes, "You should try this. This is a German thing. I never heard. Grape pie."
Yeah,
And you know that?
I do know that.
I'd never known that. So we got it, and I guess we didn't have the taste for it. although we finished it.
We have a question here.
You mentioned Galax. I wonder if you've ever been to a barbecue spot in Galax.
Oh, do you know of one, or if I know it?
Well, yeah, but I can't remember the name of it. But it's not a big place, so you can easily find it. They also have great banana pudding there.
Is it Aunt B's? There's a place called Aunt B's in Galax. It's on 58.
Yeah, it's on the corner downtown. But anyway,
I'm not sure.
We were riding our bicycle from that place, FRIES, to Galax. And when we sat down at the barbecue restaurant, we asked the server, we said, we rode our bicycles from over there. How do you pronounce that? And he said, it's freeze in the winter and fries in the summer.
Oh, that's good.
That's good.
I've never heard that. That's good.
Everybody, let's give Bill another round of applause.
Thank you.
He'll be up in the lobby, happy to sign copies of his book.